Imagine being the most famous martial artist on earth, stronger than almost anyone alive, faster than cameras could capture, and then suddenly dying at only 32 years old. No battle, no accident, no warning. Just a collapse in a quiet Hong Kong apartment on a hot July afternoon in 1973. Doctors issued a simple explanation, but even today many historians, physicians, and fans still debate what truly happened to Bruce Lee. The official record tells one story. The witnesses tell another, and over the decades, a long list of theories has emerged, some medical, some mysterious, some almost unbelievable. To understand the real story behind Bruce Lee's death, we need to examine the explanations one by one, starting with the most widely accepted one. Number 10. Cerebral edema. The official medical explanation. When Bruce Lee died on July 20, 1973, the official autopsy report listed the cause of death as cerebral edema, which simply means swelling of the brain. At first glance, the explanation sounds clinical and straightforward. According to the doctors who examined him, Bruce Lee's brain had swollen dramatically, increasing from a normal weight of about 1,400 grams to more than 1,500 grams. That swelling placed immense pressure inside his skull and ultimately shut down vital functions. To understand why this was so alarming, imagine the brain like a computer sealed inside a rigid metal box. If that computer begins to expand, there is nowhere for it to go. Pressure builds, circuits fail, eventually the system crashes. In Bruce Lee's case, doctors believed something triggered his brain to swell rapidly, leading to his sudden death. But that explanation raised immediate questions. What caused the swelling in the first place? Healthy young athletes rarely suffer fatal cerebral edema without a clear underlying trigger. Bruce Lee was known for his extraordinary physical conditioning. He ran miles every day, practiced martial arts for hours, lifted weights, and maintained extremely low body fat. Friends described him as almost superhuman in his fitness. When news of his death spread, fans across the world struggled to believe that someone so strong could die from something that sounded almost random. Medical investigators attempted to trace the cause of the swelling and quickly focused on a painkiller Bruce Lee had taken earlier that day. According to reports, Bruce Lee had been working on the script for the upcoming film Game of Death when he complained of a headache. Actress Betty Ting Pei gave him a tablet called Equagesic, a medication containing aspirin and a muscle relaxant. Shortly afterward, Bruce Lee lay down to rest. When attempts to wake him later failed, emergency services were called. By the time doctors arrived, he was already gone. The official conclusion stated that Bruce Lee experienced a hypersensitive reaction to the medication, which then triggered the fatal brain swelling. In other words, a rare allergic reaction. For many doctors, this explanation was medically plausible. Allergic reactions to medications can indeed cause dangerous swelling throughout the body, including the brain. However, as the story spread, people began asking uncomfortable questions. Bruce Lee had taken medications before without issue. Why would a mild painkiller suddenly trigger such an extreme reaction? And why did similar symptoms appear months earlier during another mysterious collapse? Those unanswered questions opened the door for alternative theories, and over time the official explanation, while still accepted by many physicians, became, thus, the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Number 9. Heatstroke and extreme physical conditioning. Another theory that has gained attention in recent years suggests that Bruce Lee may have died from heatstroke combined with his unusually intense training habits. At first this might sound surprising, but the more researchers studied Bruce Lee's lifestyle, the more intriguing the idea became. Bruce Lee's physical discipline was legendary. He trained almost obsessively. His daily routine included martial arts drills, strength training, running, stretching, sparring, and studying combat techniques. Many athletes pushed themselves hard, but Bruce Lee pushed himself far beyond normal limits. Friends recalled that he often trained multiple times per day and constantly experimented with new conditioning methods. One particularly unusual detail began to stand out to medical researchers decades later. Bruce Lee had his sweat glands removed from his underarms during a cosmetic procedure earlier in his life. The surgery was intended to reduce sweating during film production, but it may have had unintended consequences. Sweat glands play a critical role in regulating body temperature. Removing them does not eliminate the body's ability to cool itself, but it can reduce efficiency. Now consider the conditions in Hong Kong during July. The weather is brutally hot and humid. Temperatures can easily exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity levels that make the air feel even heavier. Under those circumstances, athletes must hydrate constantly and allow their bodies to cool. Some researchers now believe Bruce Lee have been particularly vulnerable to overheating. He trained intensely, maintained extremely low body fat, and reportedly drank less water than many athletes because he preferred fruit juices and protein drinks. Combine that with reduced sweating capacity, and the possibility emerges that his body simply overheated beyond recovery. In fact, Bruce Lee had experienced a frightening incident only 2 months before his death. During a dubbing session for Enter the Dragon, he suddenly collapsed and suffered seizures. Doctors initially feared brain swelling even then. He was hospitalized and recovered, but the episode suggested something in his physiology might already have been unstable. Modern medical analyses have revisited that event and proposed that it could have been an early sign of heat stroke. Severe heat stroke can cause brain swelling, confusion, seizures, and sudden collapse, all symptoms Bruce Lee experienced during that earlier incident. If that theory is correct, the final day of Bruce Lee's life might have followed a tragic pattern. A combination of intense exercise, dehydration, summer heat, and reduced ability to sweat could have pushed his body past its limits. The headache he reported that afternoon might have been an early warning sign. By the time he lay down to rest, the damage could already have been unfolding inside his body. Unlike dramatic conspiracy theories, this explanation is grounded in physiology and environmental conditions. It suggests that Bruce Lee's relentless pursuit of physical perfection, something that helped build his legend, may also have placed extraordinary strain on his body. Yet even this theory does not fully explain every detail. Many athletes train intensely in hot climates without fatal consequences. And once again, the mystery deepens when we consider the strange circumstances surrounding Bruce Lee's final hours. Over time, more theories emerged, some medical, some psychological, and some far darker. Each attempts to answer the same haunting question: how could the most famous martial artist in the world die so suddenly, in the prime of his life? Number 8. The earlier collapse that few people talk about. Long before the world heard the shocking news of Bruce Lee's death, there had already been a warning sign, one that in hindsight feels almost chilling. In May of 1973, just 2 months before he died, Bruce Lee experienced a sudden and frightening medical crisis while working on the film Enter the Dragon. At the time, Bruce Lee was in a dubbing studio in Hong Kong recording dialogue for the film. Everything seemed normal. He had been training hard, rehearsing fight scenes, and preparing for what would become the most important movie of his career. Enter the Dragon was his first major international production, a project that would finally bring martial arts cinema to a global audience. But during the dubbing session, something went terribly wrong. Bruce Lee suddenly collapsed. Witnesses described him becoming disoriented and struggling to stand. Within moments, he began experiencing violent seizures. The situation became so serious that he was rushed to the hospital immediately. For a moment, those around him feared he might already be dying. Doctors performed emergency examinations and discovered something alarming: Bruce Lee's brain was swelling. Once again, the same condition that would later appear in the official autopsy report, cerebral edema. At the time, the cause of the swelling remained unclear. Some doctors suspected dehydration or extreme exhaustion. Bruce Lee had been working relentlessly for months, directing fight choreography, acting, producing, and training intensely every day. Others suggested a reaction to cannabis, since traces of marijuana were reportedly found in his stomach during medical testing. Bruce Lee eventually recovered from the incident and left the hospital. To many people around him, it seemed like a strange but isolated medical scare. Bruce Lee himself reportedly brushed it off and returned to work almost immediately. He continued training, continued filming, and continued pushing his body as hard as ever. But looking back today, many researchers believe that May incident may have been the first clear warning that something was seriously wrong. The symptoms from that earlier collapse mirror what happened on the day he died. Brain swelling, headaches, disorientation, loss of consciousness. In modern medical analysis, this pattern suggests that Bruce Lee may have been experiencing repeated episodes of neurological stress episodes that eventually became fatal. Imagine an athlete who keeps ignoring warning signals from the body. The engine overheats once, but after it cools down, the driver keeps pushing it to the limit. Then the overheating happens again. Eventually, the system fails completely. That earlier collapse now appears to be more than just an isolated health scare. It may have been the moment when Bruce Lee's body first revealed the vulnerability that would later end his life. And yet, the story becomes even more complicated when we examine another factor that was quietly affecting Bruce Lee during those final months: extreme weight loss and physical strain. #7 Extreme weight loss and physical stress. By the summer of 1973, Bruce Lee looked astonishingly lean even by the standards of elite athletes. Photographs from that period show a body that seems almost impossibly defined. His muscles were razor sharp, his body fat incredibly low, and his physique looked like something carved from stone. But behind that iconic image, some people close to Bruce Lee were growing concerned. Friends and colleagues noticed that Bruce Lee had lost a significant amount of weight in the months leading up to his death. Reports suggest that he dropped from around 145 pounds to nearly 126 pounds. For a man already extremely lean, that was a dramatic change. In the world of modern sports science, such rapid weight loss can place enormous stress on the body. When athletes reduce body fat to extremely low levels, hormonal balance can shift, hydration levels become unstable, and the body's ability to regulate temperature can weaken. Bruce Lee was known for constantly experimenting with training and diet. He studied exercise science obsessively and often pushed his routines further than most professional athletes would dare. His workouts included high-intensity martial arts drills, heavy strength training, endurance running, and hours of practice with punching bags and wooden dummies. But unlike modern athletes, Bruce Lee did not have access to a team of sports physiologists monitoring his condition. He was essentially experimenting on his own body. Some researchers now believe that Bruce Lee may have been operating at the edge of physiological exhaustion. His metabolism was extremely high, his body fat dangerously low, and his training intensity relentless. Combine those factors with dehydration, heat, and possible medication reactions, and the situation becomes increasingly fragile. There is also evidence that Bruce Lee was sleeping very little during that period. He was juggling multiple film projects, writing scripts, choreographing fights, managing business negotiations, and maintaining his punishing training schedule. In interviews, Bruce Lee often spoke about his intense drive to succeed and his refusal to slow down. In American culture, there is a phrase sometimes used to describe individuals like this: running on pure fire. It means someone who is so driven that they push beyond normal limits, fueled by ambition and passion rather than rest or caution. Bruce Lee embodied that mentality. But the human body has limits, no matter how strong the person may be. Imagine a high-performance sports car pushed to maximum speed every single day. The engine may run beautifully for a while, but eventually components begin to wear down, temperatures rise, and small mechanical stresses accumulate. Without careful monitoring and maintenance, failure becomes inevitable. Some medical experts now believe Bruce Lee have been approaching exactly that point. His incredible physical discipline made him stronger than most men alive, but it may also have pushed his body into an unstable state. When the final day arrived in July 1973, the combination of intense training, rapid weight loss, dehydration, medication, and heat might have created a perfect storm inside his body. Yet despite these plausible medical explanations, many people were not satisfied with them. The suddenness of Bruce Lee's death, combined with the mysterious circumstances surrounding his final hours, led to theories that were far more controversial and, in some cases, far more disturbing. Number 6. The painkiller theory, a fatal reaction to Equagesic. Among all the explanations surrounding Bruce Lee's death, one theory remains closely tied to the official medical conclusion, yet it continues to raise debate even decades later. This is the painkiller theory, centered on the medication Bruce Lee took shortly before he died. On the afternoon of July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee had spent part of the day discussing the upcoming film Game of Death with producer Raymond Chow. Later that afternoon, he visited the apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei, where they continued talking about film plans and script ideas. At some point during the meeting, Bruce Lee complained about a headache. This detail might sound ordinary. Headaches are common, especially for someone who had been working intensely and living under tremendous pressure. But in hindsight, many people now wonder if that headache was an early warning sign of something more serious already happening inside his body. Betty Ting Pei offered him a tablet called Equagesic, a medication that was widely used at the time to treat pain and muscle tension. The drug contained aspirin combined with a muscle relaxant called meprobamate. Millions of people had taken similar medications without serious problems. Bruce Lee swallowed the tablet and soon afterward decided to lie down for a nap. According to witness accounts, he appeared calm and relaxed. There was no immediate sign that anything was wrong. Hours later, however, when Betty Ting Pei attempted to wake him, Bruce Lee did not respond. Panic quickly followed. Phone calls were made. Raymond Chow returned to the apartment. Eventually doctors were summoned. But by the time medical help arrived, Bruce Lee was already gone. When the autopsy was performed, investigators discovered the swelling in his brain. Doctors concluded that Bruce Lee had likely suffered a hypersensitive reaction to Equagesic, meaning his body reacted to the drug in an unusually severe way. This explanation seemed logical at first. Allergic reactions can cause dangerous swelling in various parts of the body. But the more researchers examined the details, the more complicated the situation became. First, Equagesic was not considered an especially dangerous medication. Severe reactions were extremely rare. Millions of prescriptions had been issued without fatal consequences. Second, Bruce Lee had taken medications before without known allergic reactions. There was no established history of drug hypersensitivity that would have predicted such a sudden and catastrophic response. Third, the timeline raised additional questions. If the drug triggered a reaction severe enough to kill him, why were there no visible signs such as breathing distress, skin reactions, or violent convulsions? In many cases of severe allergic reactions, symptoms escalate rapidly and dramatically. Instead, Bruce Lee simply lay down and never woke up. Modern medical experts who revisit the case often suggest that the medication may not have been the sole cause, but rather a contributing factor. If Bruce Lee's body was already under extreme physiological stress, dehydration, overheating, neurological instability, the drug might have acted as the final trigger that pushed his system beyond recovery. In that scenario, Equagesic becomes less of a villain and more of a catalyst in a chain reaction that had already begun. Still, for many people around the world, the idea that Bruce Lee, arguably the most physically capable martial artist of his era, could die from a simple painkiller feels deeply unsatisfying. And because of that dissatisfaction, alternative explanations began to spread rapidly after his death. Some of those explanations moved away from medicine entirely and entered a much darker territory. Number 5. The triad conspiracy theory. Whenever a global celebrity dies, suddenly under mysterious circumstances, conspiracy theories often follow. In the case of Bruce Lee, one of the most persistent theories involved organized crime groups known as triads. To understand why this theory gained traction, it helps to understand the environment of Hong Kong's film industry during the early 1970s. At that time, the entertainment business was not always clean or transparent. Organized crime groups were rumored to have influence over film financing, distribution, and theater operations. Some people believed Bruce Lee's meteoric rise had disrupted powerful interests. Bruce Lee was not just a movie star, he was transforming the entire martial arts film industry. His movies were generating enormous profits, and his creative control over projects was growing rapidly. He negotiated contracts that gave him more authority than most actors in Hong Kong cinema had ever possessed. In American terms, imagine a young actor suddenly gaining the level of control normally reserved for major Hollywood producers. It was an unprecedented shift in power. According to conspiracy theorists, this sudden independence might have angered individuals who preferred the old system of control. Rumors began circulating that Bruce Lee had received threats from criminal organizations unhappy with his refusal to cooperate with certain demands. Some versions of the story suggested he had refused protection payments. Others claimed he had challenged individuals connected to the underworld. However, when historians examine these claims carefully, they find very little credible evidence. No verified police reports confirm such threats. None of Bruce Lee's close friends or collaborators ever provided clear testimony supporting the idea that organized crime targeted him. Raymond Chow, who worked closely with Bruce Lee during his most successful films, consistently dismissed the theory as fantasy. Despite the lack of evidence, the triad theory remained popular for one simple reason: people struggled to accept the idea that Bruce Lee's death could be explained by ordinary medical causes. There is something psychologically powerful about believing that extraordinary figures must meet extraordinary ends. In storytelling, heroes rarely die quietly. Their deaths are dramatic, mysterious, or heroic. Bruce Lee, however, was not a fictional character. He was a human being with a human body, vulnerable to the same biological limitations that affect everyone else. Still, the conspiracy theories did not stop there. In fact, some of the strangest explanations for Bruce Lee's death emerged not from crime or medicine, but from something far more unexpected: ancient folklore and superstition. Number 4. The family curse theory. Among the many explanations that surfaced after Bruce Lee's death, one of the most unusual was the idea of a family curse. To many people in the West, this theory may sound like something from a horror movie. But in parts of traditional Chinese folklore, the belief that misfortune can follow a family across generations has existed for centuries. When Bruce Lee died in 1973, he was only 32 years old. For fans around the world, the loss was shocking enough on its own. But years later, another tragedy struck the Lee family that seemed almost too strange to ignore. In 1993, exactly 20 years after Bruce Lee's death, his son Brandon Lee was killed in a tragic accident while filming the movie The Crow. During a scene involving a prop gun, a malfunction caused a real projectile to strike Brandon Lee. He died at only 28 years old. The eerie parallel between father and son dying young led many people to whisper about something darker. Some fans began suggesting that the Lee family was cursed, that some unseen force had followed them across generations. To understand why this idea gained attention, it helps to remember how mythology and storytelling influence the way people interpret tragedy. When two remarkable individuals from the same family die suddenly and young, the human mind often searches for patterns or supernatural explanations. In Chinese culture, there are long-standing beliefs about ancestral spirits, fate, and karmic balance. Some traditional stories speak of families being affected by unresolved spiritual conflicts or ancestral debts. In the case of Bruce Lee, some rumors claimed that enemies from the past or disturbed spirits had cursed the Lee lineage. However, when examined logically, the curse theory collapses quickly. Bruce Lee came from a large extended family with many relatives who lived long and healthy lives. There was no consistent pattern of mysterious deaths across generations. Brandon Lee's tragic accident, while shocking, was ultimately explained by a well-documented film set malfunction. In reality, the idea of a family curse tells us less about Bruce Lee and more about human psychology. When people admire someone deeply, they often elevate that person into a mythic figure. And when such figures die young, the mind struggles to accept ordinary explanations. Instead, people create narratives that match the emotional weight of the loss. Bruce Lee had already become larger than life during his lifetime. After his death, that legend only grew stronger. For many fans, the idea that something supernatural surrounded his life and death felt strangely fitting even if it lacked evidence. But not all theories surrounding Bruce Lee's death were mystical or conspiratorial. Some were rooted in a very modern concern: the powerful combination of intense physical training and chemical supplements, number 3 drug and supplement use. Bruce Lee was known not only for his martial arts mastery, but also for his relentless curiosity about training methods, nutrition, and physical performance. Long before sports science became mainstream, Bruce Lee was already experimenting with different ways to push his body to new limits. His home gym reportedly contained an impressive range of equipment for the time: weights, resistance devices, punching bags, and specialized training tools. He kept detailed notes on workout routines and often studied exercise manuals and bodybuilding literature. But Bruce Lee didn't just experiment with training techniques. He also experimented with nutrition and supplements. Friends and training partners later described Bruce Lee as someone who constantly tested different dietary approaches. He consumed protein drinks, vitamin blends, herbal extracts, and various performance supplements designed to increase energy and recovery. In today's world, professional athletes typically have medical teams monitoring exactly what they consume. In the early 1970s, however, that level of supervision simply did not exist. Some researchers have speculated that Bruce Lee's use of supplements might have played a role in destabilizing his metabolism. High doses of certain substances, especially when combined with dehydration, stress, and extreme training, can place strain on the nervous system. One point that has drawn particular attention involves cannabis. Toxicology reports indicated that a small amount of marijuana was found in Bruce Lee's stomach during the autopsy. While cannabis is not typically associated with fatal reactions, some doctors suggested it might have interacted with other substances in unpredictable ways. Still, most experts believe that cannabis alone would not explain the severe brain swelling observed during the autopsy. More likely, if substances played a role at all, they would have been part of a broader chain of factors: intense physical stress, extreme heat, dehydration, and neurological instability. Imagine a complex machine operating under maximum pressure. Every component is working hard, every system running near its limits. In such a situation, even a small disturbance, whether chemical, environmental, or physiological, can cause the entire system to fail. Bruce Lee lived a life that constantly pushed those limits. His training philosophy was built on the idea of breaking boundaries and discovering what the human body could achieve. But sometimes the boundary between peak performance and physical danger is thinner than anyone realizes. By the time Bruce Lee lay down to rest on that July afternoon in 1973, his body may already have been under tremendous hidden strain. The painkiller he took, the heat of the day, the relentless training, and the complex chemistry of his metabolism might all have been quietly converging toward the same tragic outcome. Yet even after examining all these possibilities, medical reactions, heat stroke, supplements, and conspiracies, the true story behind Bruce Lee's death still points toward a final explanation that many modern researchers now consider the most convincing. Number to hyponatremia, the modern medical explanation. For many years, the official explanation of Bruce Lee's death remained cerebral edema caused by a reaction to medication. But decades later, medical researchers revisiting the case began to propose another possibility, one that may connect many of the strange details surrounding his final months. This theory centers on a condition called hyponatremia, which occurs when the level of sodium in the blood becomes dangerously diluted. To understand why this matters, imagine the human body as a carefully balanced chemical system. Sodium is one of the key elements that regulates how water moves between cells and tissues. When sodium levels drop to low, water begins to flow into cells uncontrollably. In most parts of the body, this causes swelling, but in the brain, where space is extremely limited, the consequences can be catastrophic. The brain begins to swell, pressure builds inside the skull, and if the swelling becomes severe enough, it can lead to seizures, loss of consciousness, and death. Now consider Bruce Lee's lifestyle during the final months of his life. He trained intensely every day, he sweated heavily during workouts, he consumed large quantities of liquids, including protein shakes and juices. And according to several reports from friends and colleagues, he had begun drinking unusually high amounts of water in an effort to stay hydrated during the hot Hong Kong summer. Under normal circumstances, drinking water is beneficial. But when water intake becomes excessive, especially when combined with heavy sweating and low sodium intake, it can dilute the body's sodium concentration. Athletes today are carefully warned about this phenomenon. In endurance sports like marathons, hyponatremia has occasionally caused serious medical emergencies. Some modern researchers believe Bruce Lee have unknowingly entered exactly this condition. Evidence supporting this theory comes from several observations. First, Bruce Lee's symptoms during the earlier may collapse, confusion, seizures, and brain swelling are consistent with hyponatremia. Second, the final autopsy finding of cerebral edema fits perfectly with the same mechanism. Third, Bruce Lee's extreme fitness level and low body fat could have made him particularly vulnerable to electrolyte imbalance. There is also another intriguing detail. Bruce Lee reportedly followed a diet that included a large amount of fruit juices and protein drinks, which can sometimes contain high water content but relatively low sodium levels. If he was sweating heavily during training and replacing fluids primarily with low-sodium beverages, the imbalance could gradually worsen. Modern sports medicine has documented cases where athletes unknowingly diluted their own sodium levels simply by drinking too much water during intense physical activity. In that sense, Bruce Lee may have fallen victim to a condition that was not widely understood at the time. Today, endurance athletes are routinely advised to maintain electrolyte balance using sports drinks or carefully controlled hydration strategies. But in the early 1970s, the science of hydration was far less developed. If this theory is correct, Bruce Lee's death may not have been caused by a single dramatic event, but rather by a silent chemical imbalance that slowly developed over time. It is a sobering possibility. The same dedication that drove Bruce Lee to train harder than almost anyone else may also have pushed his body into a dangerous physiological state. Yet even with this explanation, one final question remains. Why has Bruce Lee's death continued to fascinate the world for so many decades? Number 1. The reality behind the legend. When people think about Bruce Lee, they rarely picture him as fragile or vulnerable. Instead, they remember the lightning-fast strikes, the fierce intensity in his eyes, and the philosophy that made him more than just a fighter. Bruce Lee represented something larger than life. He was the first Asian martial artist to become a global movie star. His films transformed the image of martial arts in Western culture. His philosophy, expressed through lines like "Be water, my friend," inspired millions of people to think differently about discipline, identity, and personal growth. In the early 1970s, Bruce Lee was on the verge of becoming one of the biggest stars in the world. Enter the Dragon was about to premiere internationally. Hollywood was finally recognizing his talent. New film projects were already being planned. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. Part of what makes Bruce Lee's death so haunting is the timing. He did not fade slowly from the public eye. He disappeared at the exact moment when his influence was exploding across the world. In American storytelling, there is a recurring theme about legends who burn bright and vanish. Young figures like James Dean or Jimi Hendrix. Their short lives leave behind an unfinished story, and that unfinished story allows the legend to grow even larger. Bruce Lee became one of those figures. The mystery surrounding his death amplified that legend. Every unanswered question, every theory, every rumor kept people talking about him. But the deeper truth may actually be simpler. Bruce Lee was not a mythical warrior immune to human limitations. He was a man who pushed himself to extraordinary extremes physically, mentally, and creatively. His ambition drove him to train harder, think deeper, and work faster than almost anyone around him. That relentless pursuit of excellence is what made him a legend, and it may also have been what placed such enormous pressure on his body. Today, half a century after his death, Bruce Lee's influence remains everywhere. Modern MMA fighters study his philosophy. Hollywood action films still echo the style he pioneered. Martial artists around the world continue to train using ideas he introduced decades ago. In many ways, Bruce Lee achieved what few people ever do. He changed the course of an entire cultural movement. The real story behind Bruce Lee's death may never be understood with absolute certainty. Medical theories will continue to evolve, and historians will continue to examine the evidence. But one thing is clear: Bruce Lee's life mattered far more than the mystery of his final day. His ideas about discipline, creativity, and self-expression continue to inspire generations. And in that sense, the man who once said absorb what is useful, discard what is useless left behind something far more powerful than any single explanation for his death. If you enjoyed exploring this story and the mysteries surrounding legendary figures like Bruce Lee, make sure to like this video and share it with friends who love martial arts history. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next deep dive into iconic fighters and untold stories from the world of combat legends. You can also join the channel membership to unlock special content and behind-the-scenes discussions. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, feel free to use the Super Thanks button below the video. Every bit of support helps us continue uncovering fascinating stories like this one.